and maybe it will spark some kind of interest that, hey, I can go in and I can sort of begin to figure out this as well and become an owner of the process too. Now, what could Washington learn?
We'll leave this discussion at this point to go live now to the floor of the U.S. Senate, where members today will continue working on a bill reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act that expires later this year. They began debate on the motion to proceed to the bill after a bill changing the U.S. Postal Service ran into controversy over amendments. There'll be procedural votes at 2:15 Eastern today. And now live to the floor of the U.S. Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
Shield them from danger as they work for peace. This is indeed a gift of a new day you have given to us. May all our endeavors honor you, and may we all serve the cause of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in this beloved land of ours. May we truly do justice and love kindness and walk humbly with you, our God. Amen.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., April 19, 2012. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Tom Udall, a senator from the state of New Mexico, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of the motion to proceed to S-1925, which the clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 312, S-1925, a bill to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act of 1994.
Mr. President, I would yield to my friend from Rhode Island.
Senator from Rhode Island is recognized.
I thank the Majority Leader for that courtesy, and I'll only take a moment to recognize and welcome Reverend Rebecca Spencer, who shared with us the prayer that began the Senate session this morning. She has been the pastor of Central Congregational Church in Providence, Rhode Island since 1988. It was my congregation for the years that I lived in Providence. My wife and I renewed our vows under her care. She is a wonderful and thoughtful preacher from the pulpit. Her church has perhaps the best musical and choral program really, certainly anywhere in Rhode Island, and probably for a good distance around. If you have not heard the Hallelujah Chorus sung at Easter at Central Congregational Church, you have really missed an extraordinary experience. But her greatest contribution, I think, in a community that she's served now for 24 years, has been pastoral work with the families that make Central Congregational Church their home and the home of their faith. From births to baptisms, and for kids coming up through the youth programs that the church runs, through marriages and unfortunately sometimes divorces, and through illness and death. Reverend Spencer is a wonderful friend and a wonderful solace and a wonderful gift to all of the congregation that she serves. She is joined today in the gallery by her sons Tom and Ezra, and we welcome them as well, and are delighted that she has taken the time and come down from Providence, Rhode Island. And I want to thank our chaplain, Chaplain Black, for his courtesy in helping to facilitate this. Majority Leader Reid, thank you very much. I yield the floor.
Mr. President, the Senate
Majority
now,
Leader's recognized.
Thank you a lot, Mr. President. The Senate is now considering the motion to proceed to the Violence Against Women and Reauthorization Act. Following my remarks and those of the Republican leader, if any, the first hour will be equally divided between the two sides. Republicans will control the first 30 minutes, Democrats the final 30 minutes. Following I note that the filing deadline for second-degree amendments to the substitute amendment and to the postal reform bill is 11 a.m. today. We're still hopeful of working out agreement on postal reform. No agreement is reached. There will be a cloture vote on the substitute amendment this afternoon at 2:15. Mr. President, for more than 2 decades, 200 years, America's postal system thrived and grew in spite of rapidly changing technology. The Postal Service survived the invention of the telegraph, the telephone. It expanded despite radio and television. It grew regardless of the fax machine. The post office was created in the days of the quill and pen. The quill, I should say, and inkwell, as I talked about yesterday. Mail bags, line-crossed horses. The post office survived all of that. But it grew through the days even of horse and buggy, steamboat and railroad, into the age of airplanes. It adjusted to the expansion of the suburbs, to the growth of cities, and to the expansion of our population generally. And it adapted from hand sorting and conveyor belts with the invention of zip codes and optical sorting machines. The post office always found creative, cutting-edge ways to do more and more, to move mail more quickly and more of it. In fact, for 2 centuries, the Postal Service actually relied on technology to cope with constant growth in the volume of mail it delivered and the number of homes and businesses to whom it delivered. And for 200 years, the Postal Service kept up with a flood of packages and letters and mail orders and online purchases and catalogs and flyers, life-saving medications and absentee ballots, bulk mail and overnight delivery. All of that, the Post Office survived. But today, the Postal Service handles nearly half the world's mail, 554 million pieces every day, 6,400 pieces every second. That feat would be impossible without modern technology and world-class workers and facilities. But now technology is both a solution and a problem. In the last 5 years, the Postal Service has seen mail volume drop by more than 20%. That trend is expected to continue. Email and online bill payments have significantly contributed to this crisis. Today, letters, orders, payments across the world happen with the click of a mouse. And the challenge facing the Postal Service is how to adapt to a decreasing volume of mail rather than how to deal with increasing demand. The bipartisan compromise before the Senate will help the system do just that. It will build a leaner, smarter post office that offers new products and services while protecting its mission, delivering the mail 6 days a week to every corner of our great nation. The postal reform legislation before this body will sensibly restructure the system while preserving overnight and Saturday delivery. And the legislation will save the Postal Service from insolvency. It will responsibly reduce the Postal Service workforce and the number of facilities it maintains. But it will also protect postal employees, including 130,000 veterans of the armed forces. It will also safeguard the more than 8 million jobs that depend on a vibrant postal system. And most importantly, it will look out for the needs of millions of seniors, people with disabilities, small business owners, and rural Americans for whom the U.S. mail is an important lifeline to the outside world. Unlike the unacceptable bill Congressman Issa is pursuing in the House, this bipartisan Senate bill preserves the Postal Service we know and rely on. The House bill, by contrast, would immediately eliminate Saturday delivery, and it would set up commissions to unilaterally cut costs by closing post offices and processing plants, avoiding union contracts and laying off tens of thousands of workers when our economy can least afford it. That may be why Congressman Issa's bill hasn't come up for a vote. Could be other reasons. But, Mr. President, even the Tea Party advocates have trouble supporting his reckless ideas. The Senate bill we're considering today isn't perfect. It won't save every post office. It won't save every job or distribution center. It won't please every senator, every postal worker, or every customer. But unlike the House legislation, it's a strong, I repeat, bipartisan bill that will modernize an institution enshrined in the Constitution without gutting its mission. So I hope we can continue to work together to pass this worthy legislation, but we're going to have to make a decision on that this morning, Mr. President. I appreciate everyone's cooperation. I especially appreciate the hard work of Senator Joe Lieberman and Senator Susan Collins, the two who will manage this legislation. And there have been others who have worked very hard on this legislation, not the least of which is Tom Carper, who's devoted a lot of his last few years of his life to this legislation. Mr. President, I would note the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President,
Republican leader is recognized.
yesterday I came to the floor to call attention.
The Senate's currently in a quorum call.
I ask consent the quorum call be dispensed.
Without objection.
Yesterday I came to the floor to call attention to a woman named Christine Svinicki, a widely respected nuclear engineer who sits on the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the federal agency charged with ensuring the safety of our nation's nuclear power plants. At the moment, Commissioner Svinicki is in Africa sharing her expertise on nuclear safety at the request of the Obama administration, which shouldn't surprise anybody since she's one of the world's leading experts on the topic. And since President Obama's own chief of staff signed a letter a few months ago expressing the administration's confidence in her commitment to the mission of the NRC and her ability to fulfill it. I have the letter. It's dated December the 12th, and I ask consent that it appear in the record at this
Without
time.
objection.
What is surprising is that despite all this, despite her expertise, despite the administration's own stated support for her work, she's not yet been renominated. The White House alone has the power to renominate. For some reason, they haven't. Look, the only possible reason for this delay is the fact that she had the courage to blow the whistle on the Commission's chairman, Gregory Jaczko, a guy whose temper and condescension towards subordinates, particularly women, nearly cost him his job. So let's be clear about this. The only reason we're even talking about Christine Svinicki right now is because she had the courage to stand up to a hostile work environment and a bully who was responsible for it. It's the only reason we're even having this conversation. She should be applauded for that, not hung out to dry. Yet that's precisely what's been happening here. Commissioner Svinicki is one of the world's leading experts on nuclear safety. She was confirmed to her current term without a single dissenting vote, not one. She enjoys the respect of her colleagues, and as the letter I just cited shows, of the Obama administration as well. Her renomination papers were completed more than a year ago, as was the FBI report that nominees have to complete ahead of being confirmed. If this nomination continues to be held up, after she had the courage to take a stand, it will send a chill up the spine of every whistleblower in Washington. Commissioner Svinicki spoke out against a guy that even the Democratic commissioners say bullied employees and intimidated female workers. Commissioner Svinicki did the right thing in raising the alarm. She shouldn't pay a price for it. The White House says it likes the job she's doing. They just sent her to Africa to give a keynote address on nuclear safety. Yet for over a year, there's been silence. It's my hope they're not rewarding abusive behavior by silencing someone who had the courage to speak out. There's no reason for this renomination and reconfirmation to wait another single day. If Democrats have a problem with Commissioner Svinicki, then let's debate it. So this morning I renew my call for the White House to send this nomination over immediately and for the Senate to act quickly to get Commissioner Svinicki reconfirmed. The White House said just yesterday there should be no interruption in the service on the commission. So why don't we get this done? Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the first hour will be equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the Republicans controlling the first 30 minutes and the majority controlling the second 30 minutes. Senator from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you. I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about the uproar that is occurring over the GSA conference waste that has been in the news of late. But my criticisms are not mainly directed towards the GSA. Over 3 years ago, I started doing oversight on conferences by government agencies. Today, I have an amendment that won't be allowed to be considered that will hold the agencies accountable in terms of their conferences. Through the years, I've put out 5 reports on wasteful conference spending from the Department of Justice, where it spent $380 million over a 5-year period on conferences, to the Department of Agriculture, to the Department of HHS in terms of sending thousands of people to one conference at a time. All of it went unheeded. And now we have the GSA with members of the Senate and the House aghast at the waste that has been spent in terms of the GSA conference out west. Had we been doing our job, and the multiple amendments that I've offered over the last 6 years to control conference spending, which have been rejected in party line votes, to try to bring some semblance of reasonableness and control to conference spending by the various federal government agencies. So we have this problem with the GSA today, but not because of the GSA, because of ourselves. Because we refuse to do the hard work of passing requirements that hold federal agencies accountable. My hope would be that we would, in one small step, accept an amendment on the postal bill that would allow us to start holding the agencies accountable. It makes for great press and great TV when we stand aghast at what is obviously wasteful spending by an agency. But that accomplishes nothing other than advance the political careers of my colleagues. What accomplishes something is real teeth, real legislation that holds the agencies accountable. So it would be my hope that we could have a vote. I don't even think it'd take a vote. I think we could get it accepted by unanimous consent that would force the agencies to now come into compliance, both in terms of transparency and accountability on how they spend their money. You know, every federal government agency today has the capability for doing teleconferencing. We don't have to send 1,000 people at $2,000 apiece to a conference to accomplish education and training. We all have it in our offices. But what the GAO has determined is most federal employees see conferencing as one of the perks of their jobs in one of their reports. So I would invite the American constituency to look at my website, coburn.senate.gov, and go to all the studies that we've put out, all the oversight reports we've put out on the wasteful conferencing spending over the last 3 to 5 years, and ask yourself a question. Why didn't Congress act on it? Why didn't we do something about it? Now we claim that we're insulted at the waste. Well, we've had 5 different opportunities on amendment votes to do something about it. We rejected it. We've seen oversight reports that are fully documented that shows the waste, and yet we haven't done anything. So if America, if you're upset with the waste of the GSA conference, who you need to be upset with is members of the U.S. Senate who have rejected time and again the ability to hold agencies accountable on their conference spending. Would be my hope that in a bipartisan manner we can address this issue, not just for GSA, but for every government agency, so that now we see transparency, now we see accountability in how the American, hard-working Americans' taxpayer dollars are spent, not wasted, and know that when they spend money on a conference, it's going to be out there, everybody's going to see it, and they're going to have to justify not only the expenditure, but the reason why we're sending people to vacation spots when we could be doing it through teleconferencing and bringing needed updates to federal employees in a much more efficient and a more effective way. And with that, I'd yield the floor, and I note my colleague from Missouri is here, and would yield to him.
Good. I think my good friend and my congressional neighbor. When we served in the House together, we represented adjoining districts in Missouri and Oklahoma, and it's good to be serving in the Senate with my friend and to hear his common sense approach to how we need to solve the problems that we're facing as a country and the needless problems the government seems to be willing to create for itself. You know, we've been talking so much, at least the President's been talking about economic fairness as the principal goal of the tax code, and frankly, the most fair thing we could do in the tax code and the most fair thing we could do in the Senate would be working to be sure that we're dealing with the important issues that job creators and families are dealing with across the country today. All of us have had the opportunity to be home for a couple of weeks for the last 2 weeks. I was able to be in the last of the 115 Missouri counties I hadn't been in since I was sworn into the Senate 15 or so months ago. And I learn a lot when I'm out there, and what I learned this time is that people are really focused on fuel costs. Fuel costs are on track to hit an average of $4 a gallon by summertime. This is more than double what fuel costs were in January of 2009, and it set the all-time record for the last 2 months. I talked to to people in South Central Missouri who are trying to provide transportation for older Americans and disabled Americans, and the fuel cost increase of $150,000 means that they have to cut back their services. The Chamber of Commerce survey this week found that nearly 1 out of 4 small businesses reported that their top concern was gas prices. And when you think about that, whether it's delivery or whether it's their employees getting to work or whether it's people deciding that they can't go to that small business, that restaurant, that bowling alley, that movie theater, or whatever it might be, because they just put too much money in the gas tank of their car, we should be concerned. Unfortunately, instead of working to pass solutions that would jumpstart our economy and restore consumer confidence, we seem to want to talk about the wrong things over and over again. We had a vote this week on the so-called Buffett tax, a tax that almost everybody that talked about this discussion said, well, it's more of a gimmick than a solution, because even if you collected this new tax on Warren Buffett and his wealthy friends, it would, in a year, you'd collect what the federal government deficit is in a day. We're not going to solve this problem dealing with 1/365th of the deficit like it's the solution to the problem. The lead sponsor of the Buffett tax in the Senate, Senator Whitehouse, said on the Senate floor that the aim of the bill is not to lower the unemployment rate or the price of gasoline. Now, why wouldn't we have a bill on the floor that the aim of it was to either do something about energy prices or job creation? This bill would have generated less than 1% of the $7 trillion deficit projected in the 2013 budget during that same period of time. It took 250 years to collect enough money under the so-called Buffett rule to pay the 2011 deficit. If the solution to last year's deficit would take us 250 years of recovery, the truth is we're just wasting a lot of time here on little things rather than big things. And you can make little things sound like big things. You can make it sound like that the fairness is the critical element of everything the government should do, as opposed to opportunity being the critical element of everything the government should do. You can make it sound like that people will still invest money, their IRA or their lifetime savings, if the return is, even if you're successful, is zero, but that's not what's going to happen. You know, Mr. President, I just finished reading a book about President Eisenhower and General Eisenhower, and there are many pertinent things today in that book, but one was when the General Eisenhower and others came back from World War II, the top tax rate was 90%. In fact, the top tax rate from about 1934, 33, 34 until 1981 was always at least 70%. But 2 points to be made there. One, nobody paid it if they could figure out how to avoid it, and almost everybody figured out how to avoid it. Lots of passive investment instead of active investment. It had to be a really good time for municipal bonds because there was no tax on municipal bonds, so why not put your money there rather than put your money at a place where if you made any money, 70% of it would go just to the federal government, or in 1946, 90% would go to the federal government. But in the capital gains rate, which happened to be the rate that World War II memoirs were taxed at, which is why it was in this book, was 25%. Even when the top rate in the country was 90%, nobody thought that the capital gains rate should be even a third of that, because they knew that people wouldn't invest money if there's no return. We need tax policies that multiply the opportunities created in our economy rather than subtract from those opportunities. If we want this not to be about politics but about math, it needs to be about multiplication, not subtraction. It needs to be about how do you drive an economy to create more private, to encourage more private sector jobs? How do you encourage investment? How do you encourage people taking risk? Because if nobody takes a risk, somebody else doesn't get an opportunity. People being willing to take a risk means that an opportunity is created for somebody else that wouldn't have been created otherwise. Last month we were here talking about tax hikes on American energy producers that clearly would be passed along to consumers. Nobody even argues that if you had passed those tax hikes last month that gas prices wouldn't go up. Now, why in the world would we be arguing about anything that would raise gas prices rather than lower gas prices? The sponsor of that bill said, nobody has made the claim that this bill is about reducing gas prices. The majority leader, Mr. Reid, admitted it's not a question of gas prices. Senator Schumer said, this was never intended to talk about lowering gas prices. Senator Begich said the bill, quote, won't decrease prices at the pump for our families and small businesses, and these were the supporters of the bill. Now, why would we have a bill on the floor to do that when we could support what the President says he's for, which is an all-of-the-above energy strategy? Let's do what we can to solve this problem. Most glaring recent example is, of course, the Keystone Pipeline. Would run right through my good friends from North Dakota, come through their state, go through Nebraska, go through other states, get to our refineries. It would create 20,000 jobs. It would decrease our country's dependence on people that don't like us very well, and it would encourage more North American energy. It would encourage energy from our best trading partner, Canada. It's just one of the common sense steps that we can make. You know, if you'd have told me a couple of years ago that when you're home in the spring of 2011, that one of the things that people would be talking to you about is why aren't we building an oil pipeline from Canada, I'd said, well, that's a pretty detailed understanding of our energy problems, but it's an understanding that's out there. If we're going to create real economic fairness, we need to work together to pass solutions that will bring down the prices at the pump and get Americans back to work. That's why I believe, Mr. President, we need to utilize all forms of American energy, including wind and solar, renewable, biomass, shale gas, shale oil, coal, nuclear alternatives. Announcements being made today by one of our Missouri utility companies in Westinghouse about small nuclear and how that might be part of this all-of-the-above solution. I'm ready to work with my colleagues across the aisle and anywhere else to do what we can to help American families. I hope that we can do this together. The shortest path to more American jobs is more American energy. The best and the most fair thing we could do is what's good for American families and small businesses and job opportunities. I hope we can get to work on that, and Mr. President, I would yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from North Dakota is recognized.
Mr. President, I rise today to discuss what I did in the Budget Committee yesterday, why I did it, and where we're headed. Mr. President, I have heard people say repeatedly the United States Senate has now gone for some 1,000 days since passing a budget resolution. Mr. President, what they're not telling people is that last year, instead of a budget resolution, the Senate and the House and the President signed a budget control law. Mr. President, the occupant of the chair knows very well, being a former Attorney General, that a resolution is purely a congressional document. Never goes to the President for his signature. The Budget Control Act that we passed last year, it's true, was not a resolution. It was a law signed by the President of the United States. Mr. President, that law, the Budget Control Act, said we're going to set the budget for this year and next, but beyond that, we are also going to put in place 10 years of spending caps, saving $900 billion. Now, on the question of whether the Budget Control Act represents or takes the place of a budget resolution for this year and next, let me just read from the text, because I think it makes it abundantly clear. It says the allocations, aggregates, and levels set in the Budget Control Act shall apply in the Senate in the same manner as for a concurrent resolution on the budget. That's pretty clear. This law, the Budget Control Act law, is to serve in the same manner as a budget resolution for 2012 and 2013, and it sets out the spending limits for those years. But it even goes further and sets spending caps for 10 years, something that in my time here has never been done in a budget resolution. Never in a budget resolution, while I've been here, has there been the setting of 10 years of spending caps, but that's what was done in the Budget Control Act last year. But it went even further than that. It also created a special committee and empowered that committee to come up with a proposal to reform the entitlement programs, Social Security and Medicare, and reform the tax system of the United States, and told that special committee, if you come to an agreement, you can bring that legislation to the floor without fear of filibuster. Without fear of filibuster. Extraordinary powers were granted in that Budget Control Act to reform Social Security and Medicare and the tax system as well. Now, Mr. President, that special committee did not agree. And the Budget Control Act said if you don't agree, there are consequences. And the consequences are another $1.2 trillion of spending cuts over on top of the $900 billion of spending restraint that was in the underlying act. Mr. President, the special committee didn't agree. So now we have the prospect of a sequester imposing another $1.2 trillion of spending cuts on top of the $900 billion of spending cuts in the underlying act, for a total of over $2 trillion of spending cuts. That's the biggest spending cut package, as far as I know, in the history of the United States. For the other side to suggest repeatedly that nothing has been done to set spending limits when they know full well the Budget Control Act passed last year, yes, it wasn't a resolution, it was a law. Boy, that's sort of Civics 101, that a law is stronger than a resolution. Now, I said several days ago I would go to markup in the Budget Committee and I would lay out a long-term plan, because while it is true we have in place for the next 2 years a budget under the Budget Control Act, what we don't have is an overall long-term plan, one that deals with spending, because the Budget Control Act also is limiting discretionary spending for the next 10 years. But we also need a program that outlines what we're going to do about entitlement programs, Medicare, Social Security, and what we're going to do to reform our tax system, which is badly broken. So, Mr. President, I said several days ago I would lay before the Budget Committee the Bowles-Simpson plan, which is the only bipartisan plan which has emerged. It was supported by 11 of the 18 commissioners. I was proud to be one. 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, 1 independent. 11 of the 18 voted to support that Bowles-Simpson package. Unfortunately, it took a super majority for that plan to come to the floor of the House and the Senate. It required 14 of the 18 members to agree. 11 of 18 did. That's more than 60%. Even in Washington, usually 60% carries the day, but it didn't with respect to the Bowles-Simpson recommendation. So I said several days ago I would put before the body the Bowles-Simpson plan. I did not suggest that we would complete action on it at the beginning of the markup. Why? Because we already have in place the spending limitations, the spending limits for this year and next. What we don't have is a longer-term plan. That longer-term plan we don't need right at this moment. We need it before the end of the year. Because at the end of the year, all of the Bush-era tax cuts are going to expire, and at the end of this year, we're going to face that sequester that I mentioned that is in the Budget Control Act law that we passed last year instead of a budget resolution. Mr. President, why do we need this longer-term plan? Well, because we are borrowing about 40 cents of every dollar that we spend. And, Mr. President, that's unsustainable. It's got to change. I've warned repeatedly of where we're headed if we don't change course, and here's where we're headed. This shows the gross debt of the United States if we stay on the trajectory we're on. You can see we're here in 2012. At the end of this year, the gross debt of the United States will be 104% of our gross domestic product, headed for 119% on our current trajectory. Now, Mr. President, that shouldn't be permitted to happen. And under the plan I laid before our colleagues yesterday, it won't happen. If we look at the underlying causes of these deficits and debt, you can see it is the relationship between spending and revenue. The red line is the spending line, the green line is the revenue line of the United States looking back to 1950. And what one sees is that spending is at or near a 60-year high. Actually, we've fallen back somewhat from the 60-year high that we reached 2 years ago. Revenue is at or near a 60-year low. Actually, we can see it's bumped up a little bit, again, from its 60-year, actually it was a 70-year low back in 2010. But still, we see a very wide gap between revenue and spending. As a result, a very large deficit, a deficit of $1.2 trillion. Now, Mr. President, I could have gone before the Budget Committee yesterday and laid out another partisan plan, because that's what's happening. Congressman Ryan, to his credit, laid out a plan, and in the House they passed his plan. I give him credit for laying out a plan. I think the plan is a very bad plan for the country, completely lacks balance, is all done on the spending side of the equation, which leads him to truly draconian cuts. Dramatic changes in Medicare, for example, dramatic changes in Medicaid, dramatic changes in the whole structure of services that the government provides people in this country. Mr. President, the American people don't want a plan that's just a partisan plan. They don't want a plan that lacks balance. They don't want a plan that's just on one side of the ledger. As I showed in the previous chart, we've got a problem on both sides of the ledger, on revenue and on spending. We've got to work on both sides of the ledger. Mr. President, the American people believe that as well. When asked in the Pew Research Center poll last year in November, what is the best way to reduce the federal budget deficit, 17% said just cut major programs. 17%, 1-7. Increase taxes, 8% said just increase taxes. 62% said a combination of both. And Mr. President, I think the American people have it right. They're pretty smart. They're pretty smart. And in 2010, we had the Bowles-Simpson Commission, the so-called Fiscal Commission. 18 of us were named to serve. It was created by the President after a legislative attempt led by Senator Gregg of New Hampshire, Republican, and myself failed here. We got a majority, but we didn't get a supermajority. And so our attempt to form a commission legislatively was thwarted. President Obama showed leadership and named a commission, a presidential commission, in order to take on the subject. And in December of 2010, that commission reported their conclusion, with 11 of the 18 of us agreeing to the recommendations. Mr. President, here are the principles and values that the Fiscal Commission used to guide their efforts. That it's a patriotic duty to make America better. That we shouldn't do anything that would disrupt the economic recovery. That we ought to cut and invest to promote economic growth and keep America competitive. That we ought to protect the truly disadvantaged. That we ought to cut spending that we cannot afford with no exceptions. That we ought to demand productivity and effectiveness from Washington. That we ought to reform and simplify the tax code. That we shouldn't make promises we can't keep. And that the problem of deficits and debt are real. And the solution will be painful. Let's be honest. When you're borrowing 40 cents of every dollar you spend, you aren't going to solve this in a way that doesn't affect anyone. All of us are going to have to participate in the solution. And we should do things to make America sound over the long run. So what did the Fiscal Commission conclude? What did they do? Here's what they did. They put in place $5.4 trillion in deficit reduction over 10 years, including savings that have already been enacted in the Budget Control Act. It lowers the deficit from 7.6% of GDP in 2012 to 2.5% in 2015 and down to 1.4% in 2022. So because of the reductions in deficits, it stabilizes the debt and begins to bring it down. In fact, it stabilizes the gross debt by 2015 and lowers it to 93% of GDP by 2022. Remember my previous slide? Here's a quiz. What did it say the debt would become by 2022 if we don't do anything as a share of GDP? It said it would become 119% if we didn't act. Under the proposal I laid before the Budget Committee yesterday, it would bring down the debt to 93% of GDP, the gross debt to 93% of GDP by 2022, instead of 119% if we fail to act. The plan I laid out reduces overall spending to 21.9% of GDP by 2022, discretionary spending to 4.8% of GDP by 2022, a record low. A record low. In fact, this overall spending level, Mr. President, is lower than the average spending level during the Reagan administration. Our colleagues on the other side are always eager to embrace Ronald Reagan's policies. Well, the proposal I laid out yesterday has a lower average spending as a share of our national income than did President Reagan during the entire period of his presidency. The plan I laid out also builds on health care reform with additional health savings and fully funds the doc fix. What is the doc fix? That is the measure to prevent the doctors who treat Medicare patients from taking a cut of more than 20%. The plan also calls for Social Security reform that ensures a 75-year solvency of Social Security, with the savings only to extend solvency, not for deficit reduction. In other words, Social Security reform, those savings are not used for deficit reduction. They are only used to extend the solvency of the program itself. And the plan I laid out includes fundamental tax reform, makes the tax code simpler, fairer, more efficient, while raising more revenue to reduce our deficit and debt. Mr. President, this chart shows the deficit as a percentage of GDP under the Fiscal Commission budget plan that I laid before our colleagues yesterday. And you can see it takes the deficit from 7.6% of GDP this year, which is down, by the way, substantially from 10%, which is where it's been, down to 1.4% in 2022. The Fiscal Commission budget plan reduces the deficits below the 3% of GDP level that is considered sustainable by economists, and it does that by 2015. Mr. President, again, the gross debt under the plan that I put before colleagues that comes from the Fiscal Commission work, the Bowles-Simpson plan that was concluded and recommended in 2010, would take the gross debt down to 93% of GDP from the 104% it is now, and as I indicated earlier, a dramatic, even more dramatic improvement compared to what the debt would be if we failed to act. And Mr. President, as I indicated, the spending level under the Fiscal Commission budget plan is about 21.8% of GDP. During the Reagan administration, spending was 22.1% of GDP. So we have lower overall spending as a share of the national income than was the case during the Reagan administration. And in fact, discretionary spending goes to an all-time low of 4.8% by the end of the 10-year plan. You can see discretionary spending, that is distinct from mandatory spending. Mandatory spending are things like Social Security and Medicare. Discretionary spending are things like defense and national parks and law enforcement and education. You can see discretionary spending as a share of our national income is dropping very sharply under this plan. What's happening on the other side of the ledger is the 800-pound gorilla, which is health care. That's the thing that threatens to swamp the boat around here, because you can see what's happening. Back in 1972, Medicare, Medicaid, and other federal health spending was about 1% of our gross domestic product. If we don't take further steps by 2050, it's going to be 13% of our gross domestic product, from 1% to 13%. Right now in this country, 18% of our GDP is going to health care. One in every $6 in our whole economy is going to health care, more than one in every $6. So that's something we've got to focus on like a laser. And in the Fiscal Commission plan, we do focus on it like a laser. Doesn't open the health reform debate that we just concluded, but it does provide an option to phase out the tax exclusion for health care that economists tell us would be one of the most effective things we could do to change the direction of health care expenditure. It fully offsets the cost of the so-called doc fix, so that our doctors treating Medicare patients don't face this huge cut that is currently in the law. And we have additional savings proposals with Medicare beneficiary cost sharing, payments to health care providers being reformed, eliminate state gaming of the Medicaid tax, and providing the Medicaid drug rebate for those who are duly eligible in Medicare. This would save hundreds of billions of dollars. Mr. President, while the Fiscal Commission did make a recommendation on Social Security, those numbers are not included in the proposal I put before our colleagues yesterday because I am precluded from doing so by the law. The Congressional Budget Act of 1974 prohibits the inclusion of Social Security in deficit totals of a budget resolution. So I did lay out the proposal from the Fiscal Commission on reforming Social Security. I could not include it in the numbers because I am precluded from doing so by the law. Mr. President, here are the recommendations from the Fiscal Commission that I included in my proposal to our colleagues, but that are not in the numbers for the reason I've given. Calls for a Social Security reform that does the following. Reform Social Security to make it solvent, not for deficit reduction. Restore 75-year solvency and puts it on a stable path beyond 75 years. Strengthens the safety net by enhancing the minimum benefit for low-wage workers and by giving an actual bump up in benefits for the oldest seniors and the long-time disabled. One of the things we know, people that live a long time run out of their benefits. So we proposed in the Fiscal Commission to actually give them a little bump up after they have been in retirement for an extended period of time. We also provided a hardship exemption for those who are unable to work past the age of 62. One of the things we know is you can take early retirement at age 62, and we're going to have to increase the retirement age of Social Security over time, over a very long time, by the way. In this proposal, we increase the retirement age to 69 over decades. Mr. President, we've got to increase also the maximum level of wages that are taxed for Social Security because the traditional standard is no longer being followed. We're not taxing 90% of the benefits. That doesn't mean the tax is 90%, by the way. It means that 90% of income is being subjected to the tax. What's been happening over years is we have been getting a reduced share of income in this economy to apply the Social Security tax to. That's one of the reasons we have a shortfall over time. And we raise the retirement age under this plan, but only very gradually, reaching 69 by 2075. This is 2012, so you don't raise the retirement age to 69 until 2075. That's 63 years from now. But make no mistake, that's important because people are living longer. In fact, people are living much longer. Now, Mr. President, we also have a need for tax reform. The tax code's out of date, it's inefficient, it's hurting U.S. competitiveness. The complexity imposed significant burden on individuals and businesses. The expiring provisions create uncertainty and confusion. We're hemorrhaging revenue to the tax gap, to tax havens, to abusive tax shelters. Many times on this floor, I've shown a picture of a little building down in the Cayman Islands called Udland House. Udland House, Mr. President, claims to be the home to 18,000 corporations. Little five-story building down in the Cayman Islands claims to be the home to 18,000 companies. Now, all those companies doing business out of that little five-story building? No. The only business they're doing down there is monkey business. And the monkey business they're doing is ducking their taxes here and shoving the burden onto all the rest of us who pay our taxes. Now, Mr. President, that's not right. So we've got to go after these tax havens, these abusive tax shelters. And, Mr. President, we can do it. We need to restore fairness. The current system is contributing to growing income inequality. And our long-term fiscal imbalance, those deficits and debt we talked about, must be addressed. Mr. President,
the CBO director, Mr. Elmendorf, talked about the economic benefits of tax reform in a hearing before the Budget Committee. He said, and I quote, "I think analysts would widely agree that reform of the tax code that broadened the base and brought down rates would be a positive force for economic growth, both in the short term and over the longer period." So, Mr. President, tax reform has got to be part of the agenda of this Congress. And here's what's happening to income disparity in America. Look what's happened. The top 1%, and I'm all for the top 1% doing well. I want everyone to do well in America. But look what's happening. Since 1979, the top 1%, their incomes have gone up almost 300%. Look what's happened to those in the middle and those at the bottom. Their incomes have stagnated. They have been about stable. Gone up a little bit, but not very much. The top 1%'s gone up like a rocket. Mr. President, one of the reasons is the tax code of the United States has dramatically reduced the wealthiest in our country, the tax burden that they shoulder. Now, they'll show you, oh, their taxes have gone way up. Well, sure they have, because their incomes have gone way up. What's gone down, what's gone way down, is the effective tax rate that they pay. The top 400 families, the wealthiest 400 families in America, have had their effective tax rate about cut in half since 1995. Again, I'm not one who's against success. I come from a family that has succeeded. I come from a family that has done well, and I'm deeply appreciative. I'm grateful for the opportunity this country has provided to my family. But you know what? What's fair is fair. What's fair is fair. We got to ask everybody to help pull this wagon out of the ditch. And we're in the ditch. And let's get serious about getting out. Now, Mr. President, if we broaden the base of our tax system, the people who will be most effective are the wealthiest among us, because look what happens. Here is the increase in after-tax income on average from tax expenditures in this country. That's the loopholes, the deductions, the credits, the exclusions that are in the current tax code. The average benefit for the top 1% is $219,000 a year. Middle quintile, their benefit is $3,000. Mr. President, if we reform tax expenditures, which we should do, that will put some additional burden on those who are wealthy. Mr. President, by the way, Mr. President, you know, not everybody who is doing well is treated the same way under this tax code. There are many people who are doing well who are paying a tax rate that is very close to the effective top rate of 35%. There are others who are paying at a level 1/2 as much. Same income, but paying much less in taxes. Why? Because they have set up their affairs in a way that they specially benefit from the credits, the exclusions, the deductions, and all the rest of the tax gimmicks that riddle the current tax code. Mr. President, here's what one of the most conservative economists in the country said about reducing tax expenditures. This is Martin Feldstein, professor of economics at Harvard, chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Reagan. This is what he said about cutting tax expenditures. Cutting tax expenditures is really the best way to reduce government spending. Eliminating tax expenditures does not increase marginal tax rates or reduce the reward for saving, investment, or risk-taking. It would also increase overall economic efficiency by removing incentives that distort private spending decisions. And eliminating or consolidating the large number of overlapping tax-based subsidies would also greatly simplify tax filing. In short, cutting tax expenditures is not at all like other ways of raising revenue. That from one of the most conservative economists in the country. Mr. President, our colleagues on the other side say, wait a minute, we shouldn't have revenues more than 18% of gross domestic product, because that's on average what it's been over the last 30 or 40 years. Mr. President, the problem with their analysis is the only times we've balanced the budget, the revenue has not been 18% of GDP. The only 5 times we balanced the budget, revenue has been at 19.7, 1969, 19.9, 1998, 19.8% of GDP, 1999, 20.6% of GDP, 2000, 19.5% of GDP, 2001. So, if people want to be serious about balancing the budget, we're going to have a revenue level based on what we see historically that's more than 18% of GDP. Mr. President, the Fiscal Commission plan that I made for colleagues yesterday, so-called Bowles-Simpson plan, does this with respect to tax reform. It eliminates or scales back those tax expenditures we were just discussing, but lowers tax rates. You can lower tax rates and get more money if you broaden the base, if you reduce some of these tax expenditures that frankly go disproportionately to the wealthiest among us and have grown like topsy in the tax code. We can promote economic growth and improve America's global competitiveness. We can make the tax code more progressive. We can have what was included in the Fiscal Commission illustrative option, a reform plan that calls for 3 rates for individuals, 12, 22, and 28%. Top rate now is 35%. A corporate rate of 28%. Corporate rate now is 35%. The Fiscal Commission plan called for capital gains and dividends to be taxed as ordinary income. So instead of having a differential for capital gains and dividends, they were taxed at ordinary rates. But the Fiscal Commission also said, if you want to have a differential, you've got to pay for it by buying up the top rate. So, for those who believe strongly you need to have a differential for cap gains and perhaps dividends, you can do that, but then you've got to have a higher top rate than 28%. It also, the Fiscal Commission plan reforms the mortgage interest and charitable deductions, preserves the child tax credit and earned income tax credit, and completely repeals the alternative minimum tax. And under this plan, revenues grow to 20.5% of GDP by 2022. Mr. President, in fact, the revenue under the Fiscal Commission plan during the 10 years of the plan averaged 19.7%. That is right at the level that has been required the only other 5 times we've balanced the budget in the last 50 years. And by the way, that is very close to the revenue level during the Clinton administration. The last time we did balance the budget, by the way, that was a Democratic president. Mr. President, some say, well, there's a big tax increase you're talking about, Senator. No, really not a big tax increase. It's additional revenue of $2.4 trillion compared to current policy, what is happening right now. But compared to current law, it is actually a $1.8 trillion tax cut, because all of the tax cuts that were put in place in the Bush administration are about to expire. So if you compare it to that law, this proposal represents a $1.8 trillion tax cut. More revenue than we would get under current policy, but less revenue than we would get under current law. Mr. President, the Fiscal Commission plan that I laid before colleagues yesterday, the so-called Bowles-Simpson plan, also had certain process changes to tighten things up around here, to become more disciplined. Set discretionary spending caps through 2022 enforced by a 60-vote point of order, and sequester. Firewalls between security and non-security spending so money couldn't be diverted between the two. A separate cap for war funding with annual limits proposed by the President. A more rigorous emergency designation procedure and annual budgeting for disasters. a fail-safe to pressure Congress to maintain a stable debt-to-GDP ratio starting in 2015, more accurate inflation adjustments for index programs, that is the so-called chained CPI, a more accurate measurement for inflation adjustment, and a process to ensure more reliable and timely extended unemployment insurance benefits. Now, Mr. President, I've heard from my colleagues repeatedly, well, the President showed no leadership. I don't believe that. I think the President showed extraordinary leadership. He averted a depression, and make no mistake, that's where we were headed when he came into office. When he came into office, here's what's happening. We were losing 800,000 jobs a month in the private sector. That's what he walked into. He didn't create the conditions that led to losing 800,000 jobs a month. He inherited that. And look at the progress that has been made. Look at the progress that has been made. Since 24 months ago, we have seen jobs in the private sector on the positive side of the ledger. 4 million jobs created. That's after he was in a situation in which we were losing 800,000 jobs a month. The last 4 months, we've been averaging 200,000 jobs created. That's pretty good leadership. That's a dramatic turnaround. The same is true of economic growth. When he came into office, the economy was shrinking at a rate of almost 9%. Now it's growing at a rate of about 3%. That's pretty good leadership. That is a dramatic change from what he inherited. So when I hear the President didn't show leadership, oh yeah? I'd say he showed pretty good leadership. He stopped the hemorrhaging. He got us going back in the right direction. It's not everything we'd hoped for, but my goodness, what a remarkable turnaround. Two of the most distinguished economists in this country said, if we had not taken the actions that were taken by the federal government at the end of the Bush administration and during this administration, we would be in a depression. Now, Mr. President, we're not in a depression. In fact, we're growing. We're growing modestly, but we're growing. We're creating jobs in the private sector. The private sector is growing. Added 4 million jobs since this president got things turning around. Mr. President, this president named the Fiscal Commission. There wouldn't be a Bowles-Simpson Commission had the president not appointed it. And the Bowles-Simpson Commission plan is what I put before our colleagues yesterday. Now, some have criticized me and say, well, you didn't vote on it. That's right. We're not going to vote on it until we believe there is the best possible chance to actually get results. And if you go back to the Bowles-Simpson Commission approach, what you saw was they didn't time the vote until after the 2010 election. And what I'm saying to colleagues is I think we ought to follow their good example. Because the truth is, people are not likely, all sides, are unlikely to get off their fixed position right before a national election. Mr. President, let me end as I began. We have a budget for this year and next. It is contained in the Budget Control Act, a law that was passed last year. And when our colleagues say there was no budget resolution passed, what they aren't telling you is instead of a budget resolution, we passed a budget control law. A law is stronger than any resolution. A resolution is purely a congressional document, never goes to the President for his signature. The Budget Control Act passed the House and the Senate and was signed by the President of the United States. And, Mr. President, it says, in part, the allocations, aggregates, and levels of spending set in this act shall apply in the Senate in the same manner as for a concurrent resolution on the budget. What could be more clear? This law is in place of a budget resolution. It is stronger than any resolution because it's a law. Next time somebody tells you there's been no budget resolution for 1,000 days, ask them, yeah, but did they pass a law that set spending limits, that set the budget for this year and next, that set 10 years of spending caps that saved $900 billion, that gave a special committee the ability to change Social Security and Medicare and the tax system in the United States and not face a filibuster? And if they didn't succeed, that there'd be another $1.2 trillion of cuts? And because they did not agree, that additional $1.2 trillion of cuts is also now in law and will begin to be imposed at the beginning of next year. That's a total of $2 trillion, $2 trillion of spending cuts in the Budget Control Act, passed by the Congress, signed by the President, and enforced today. That is the biggest spending cut package in the history of the country. Now, anybody suggest to you no spending limits have been put in place, ask them, what about the Budget Control Act? Didn't you vote on that? Didn't you vote on that? Because it passed the House, the Republican-controlled House. They passed it. It passed the United States Senate. And it was signed by the President of the United States. It is the law. A law is stronger than any resolution. Mr. President, I thank the Chair and yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from West Virginia is recognized.
First of all, I want to thank my colleague, Senator Ken Conrad from North Dakota,